Hello everyone, I'm Arena International Master Rishikesh Chavan. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to discuss Dutch defense. So we are going to see an interesting variation against Dutch defense. So let's start. D4, F5. So here the normal moves are something like white plays c4 and then black continues with knight f6, e6, or even he can play Leningrad the Dutch with g6 and bishop g7. But here we are going to play a very interesting line. We are not at all going to play c4. So we are skipping c4 and we are directly going to play knight c3. But before we move to the main line, let's see the few important variations. So sometimes, so to avoid this quick knight c3, sometimes black starts with e6 first, and only when white plays c4, he then shifts to Dutch defense. So keep this thing in mind. So sometimes your opponent may start with e6 first. He will wait for you to play c4, and then once c4 is played, he will continue with Dutch defense, that is f5. But if your opponent plays f5 directly, then you we have this knight c3 wala variation. So let's move ahead with this e6 variation first. C4, f5, knight c3, f6, knight f3. So here in this position, black has few important, or you can say interesting, continuations coming up. You can play d5. So d5 is a kind of stone wall, but this is a slightly inferior version of stone wall, since white can immediately take control of the hole on e5. So here is there is a hole on e5, so we can play something like bishop f4, c6, e3, bishop e7, bishop d3, castles, queen c2, knight e4, and then there is a very interesting move, that is g4. Keep this idea in mind. G4 is a very effective move in normal Dutch, where white plays c4 also. Queen a5, pinning the knight, g into f5, bishop b4. Bishop b4 looks very threatening because this knight is under attack. There are three attacks on the knight but only two defenders, and this knight is pinned badly, so it looks very threatening. But white has all his bases covered. He plays f6. He's giving back that pawn so that he can create some disturbances in white's pieces. Knight into f6. Here instead of knight into f6, if black plays something like knight c3, so knight c3 is actually a blunder, because bishop into h7 check. There is a forced checkmate coming up. So after king h8, f into g7 check. It is compulsory for black to capture the pawn. So he plays king into g7, and then there follows queen g6 check, king h8, bishop e5 check, forced rook f6, and now white can checkmate the black king with either bishop into f6 checkmate, or he can even play queen g8 checkmate. So here, if black is trying to win some extra material by using this pin on c3, he is going to lose very quickly. So after f6, that is why we are sacrificing the pawn so that this diagonal can be opened. So after f6, knight into f6 is a good move for black. But then rook g1, and again we will use this open g file for attack. So this bishop is already there. The bishop and queen are already attacking the h7 pawn. This knight can also join the party very soon. So black's king is very vulnerable. These queen side pieces are not even active. So black cannot build a strong defense in this position. So apart from d5, white black can even play bishop b4. But after bishop b4, queen b3 attacking the bishop, queen e7, a3 again attacking the bishop, bishop into c3, queen into c3. This is the whole idea behind playing queen b3, because whenever black captures on c3, white wants to recapture with the piece so that his pawn structure will remain intact. Knight e4 attacking the queen, queen c2. So here white has wasted lot of moves with the queen, but he can do that because he has successfully stopped black from weakening white's pawn structure. b6, again this g4 move, bishop b7, g into f4, f5, sorry, e into f5, rook g1, castles. Castling on the king side is very risky. Here white is already attacking through this open g file. This bishop is active. This knight has lot of important squares to move, and this queen can also join the attack pretty quickly. So here black should have developed this knight, and then he should have castled on the queen side, because castling on the king side is very risky for the king. King is not at all safe. So bishop h6, of course, pin that attacking the pinning pawn. Rook f7 is forced. Otherwise, if he pushes the pawn ahead, then black is losing his rook. Rook f7, e3, king h8, bishop g5, attacking the queen, knight into g5, knight into g5. Now the rook is attacked, so he has to move the rook again. And now after long castles, again we can say white has a slight advantage. The advantage of having this open file on the king side, strong knight, queen is already active through this diagonal, so he can continue his attack with playing something like bishop d3, attacking the pawn one more time. And to if to defend the pawn, if black plays something like g6, so maybe white can continue his attack with h4 and h5. So keep all these options in mind. So let's move on to our main line, that is knight c3. Knight c3 is very important or very tricky because your opponent, the Dutch player, is expecting you to play c4. So if you are totally bypassing c4 and you are playing knight c3 directly, so that way you are saving one move, and that one move can be used to develop your piece or to start your attack right away with something like Staunton Gambit. So the Staunton Gambit is, instead of knight c3, here white starts with e4. So e4 is the Staunton Gambit, and the game may progress like this: f into e4, f3, one more pawn is sacrificed, e into f3, knight into f3. This looks something like Smith-Mora Gambit. Uh, in the against Sicilian defense, white can use this Smith-Mora Gambit line. So the same thing is happening over here. You can say it's a reverse Smith-Mora Gambit. Knight f6, bishop d3, e6, knight g5. So knight g5 again is a very attacking move. Right now this pawn looks supported with enough black supports, but here white is going to play knight into pawn check. The knight, not check, sorry, knight into h7, knight into h7, bishop into h7, and after he plays rook into h7, sorry, before playing rook into h7, knight into h7, knight into h7, and then queen h5 check is coming up, so that he will pick up the knight over here, and that way white is getting a free pawn. Knight c6, of course, knight into h7, knight e7, castles, knight f5. Now once this knight is on f5 and this diagonal is blocked, now white has to get this knight out. So instead of getting the knight out, he captured the bishop, rook into f8, g4. So after g4, you can see that the white's king is badly exposed, but no black piece is in a position to attack white's king. White's king is pretty safe over here. Bishop g6 check, king e7, knight c3, and f7, d5, knight g8. So black has lost a lot of moves with his knight maneuvering, but still the knights are not totally safe, or knights are not on their best possible square. And as you can see, most of the black pieces are trapped on this back rank. King is moved ahead, so king is blocking other pieces to come out. So this position is as good as lost for black. So white can start his or continue his attack with queen h5. Now this knight is under attack. White is going to capture the knight for free. Knight d6 forced. Bishop f4 attacking the knight. c6. One more idea of bishop f4 is white is going to sacrifice the knight with knight d5, or instead of sacrificing the knight, he can simply play something like d5, because once black captures the pawn, the rook a e1 check will be killing. So that is why c6 to stop all the tactics on d5. Queen h7, now attacking the d7 pawn, and then it can lead to a quick checkmate for black. So knight e8 to save the checkmate or to save the pawn, and now there follows bishop e5, and now it is not possible for black to defend this pawn. So he is going to lose the pawn, and pretty soon he is going to lose the game also. So this is a totally winning position for white. So let's continue with the knight c3, right? So that was a Staunton gambit for you. Knight f6, bishop g5, e6, e4. Instead of e4, white has one very interesting continuation. It's kind of risky but interesting nonetheless. b4, bishop e7. Here, instead of bishop e7, if black chooses to capture the pawn, then white has e4 at 6, of course, because otherwise pushing the pawn ahead will win the black knight. Bishop into f6, queen into f6, queen into g4. White got back his sacrificed pawn. He is White sacrificing this d4 pawn also, but again capturing the d4 pawn is risky for black, because then white will start attacking the queen with moves like rook d1 or knight f3, and slowly white pieces are getting very active, and black has to move his queen again and again. So that is why black is not going to capture that pawn. So instead, he prefers to develop his pieces. Bishop b4, long castles, bishop into c3, b into c3. So this castling is broken. The castling wall is broken, I would say. But again, as you can see, no black piece is in the position to attack this exposed white king. So even if the castling wall is broken, white king is totally safe. Castles, knight h3. So this knight is heading towards this g6 square. So he can play knight f4 later on, and then this, or maybe we can directly play f4 and then f5, e5, of course, to stop f4, rook g1. Now the checkmate is coming up on g7, so black has to be careful. d6, attacking the queen, queen h5. Now after queen h5, again white has to be black has to be very careful, because this g7 pawn is pinned. So whenever this queen moves away, white is going to play queen into h6. If the black queen is not going to move away, then white is going to play rook g6 first, and then he's going to capture the pawn. Bishop h3, bishop into h3, knight c6, and rook g3. So one plan of rook g3 is to double the rook on g file, and once the rooks are doubled, it will be very difficult for black to defend his king side. He can try playing something like say f5, but then white will continue with bishop f5, and then h4. So after h4, this thin shelter black king is having is totally destroyed, and black will mostly get checkmated very soon, or he is going to lose lot of material. So after bishop e7, after g4, it is not good for black to capture that g4 pawn. So he is going to play bishop e7. So we are going to capture the pawn. E into f5, bishop g2, knight e4, bishop into e7, queen into e7, queen d3. Why queen d3? Because here, if white captures the knight, then this e4 pawn is going to hamper white's development. For example, this knight cannot come out. There is no proper shelter for the king on this side. Even the getting the bishop out from this knight out from h3 is not a very interesting choice. So that is why he's playing queen d3. so that he is attacking the knight one more time, and now here white is getting a free pawn. That is why black is forced to capture on c3, into c3, d6, knight h3. And again we can say white has a slight advantage because of this open g file. So he can simply castle on the queen side, and then he can line up his rooks on the g file. He can play something like say knight f4, and then start his attack with h4, h5, h6, like that. So let's move to the main game, e4. So keep this g4 line in mind. The g4 is a very interesting line. F into e4, knight into e4, bishop e7. As the knight is pinned, black must unpin the knight. Bishop into f6, bishop into f6, knight f3, castles. Here, instead of castling, black can choose to play something like b6. So he is targeting this hanging knight on e4 by playing bishop b7. So for that, white has this bishop d3, bishop b7, knight e5, castles, queen h5. So here white is attacking this pawn. There is a discovered attack coming up on h7. Knight into f6 is a very strong move. This e5 knight is controlling very important squares on black's queen king side. So black has to be very careful over here. For example, if you play some careless move like queen e7, he will fall in trap of queen into h7. Queen into h7 is a killing move because king into h7, knight into f6 check. He's forced to move out. He cannot go inside. For example, if you go to h8, then knight b6 is curtains. It's a checkmate. And king h6 forced. Knight g4 check. Again king g5 forced. h4 check. King f4 is forced. So it's a king walk. By sacrificing the queen, white had successfully brought black's king out in the open. More importantly, the black king is surrounded by lots of white pieces and pawns. b3 check, king f3, bishop e2 check, king g2, rook h2 check, king g1, and now a very neat move, that is king d2. Here also white can even try castling long, and then there will be a quick checkmate. So this king hunt is very interesting. So whenever the queen is on h5 and the bishop is on d3, and there are two knights who can assist your attack, think about this sacrifice. Maybe you don't have to sacrifice the queen in every position, but once this knight is moved away, this open diagonal and with the queen self, lot of checkmate tactics or the material winning tactics can be coming up. So let's see, instead of b6, after knight f3, instead of b6, what if we play something like queen e7? So here black is thinking about castling long, so that his king will be more safe on this queen side. So after queen e7, we have bishop d3, knight c6, c3, securing the d4 pawn, and at the same time limiting this knight's sorry, limiting the black knight's activity. b6, queen e2, bishop b7, long castles, long castles, bishop a6. So here if white wants to checkmate black king quickly, he must get rid of these two defenders. Once these two defenders are gone, then it will be easier for white to give checkmate. So that is why white played bishop a6, queen f7, rook h e1, rook h f8. So here white is sorry, black is trying to launch his attack through this open f file. Bishop into b7 check, king into b7, queen b5. So again, this is a very interesting position. White's pawn chain is moving towards the king side. So according to the pawn chain rule, white should attack on the king side. But because the king is not so safe over here, white can think about starting his attack on the queen side by playing something like b4, a4, and then a5. So even this knight may assist him. Maybe he can use rook lift to get the rooks on the queen side to give a quick checkmate. So again, this is an interesting idea, but right now we can say that white is having a slight advantage. It's not totally winning for white. So let's move back to the main line, that is castles. So knight f3 castles, bishop d3, knight c6 attacking the d4 pawn. So c3 is forced over here. d5, here after d5, the centrally placed strong knight is kicked away. But while doing that, black has created a weakness on e6. This e6 square is a backward pawn, and what's making the matter worse is this backward pawn is on the open file. So it's a long term weakness black has given to the white. Knight into f6, into f6, and of course bishop b4, b5. Bishop b5 is a very interesting move. The idea is to just capture the knight, because once this knight is gone, there won't be any piece who can control this d5, sorry, e5 square. So it is said that a backward pawn is weak, and also square in front of the backward pawn is also weak. So once this knight is gone, both the squares will be controlled or will be attacked by white's pieces, and then black will have a very horrible end game. So that is why logically black is saving his knight. So maybe he can move his knight to g6 and then start controlling the d5, sorry, e5 square. Castles, knight g6, bishop d3. Again, white is trying to exchange that strong knight with his bishop. So black is forced to play knight f4, knight e5, d6. So maybe he's trying to develop his bishop from this diagonal, or maybe even he is trying to play c5 on the next move so that he can create some center tension. g3, attacking the knight. One check is coming up, but white is totally fine with that, because black will have to move his knight again. Queen h5. So again, you have to be very careful on this 7 square. There are a lot of tactics coming up. g6 is forced. Otherwise, black will lose a pawn after white kicks his knight away. g6, queen g5, sorry, queen g4, knight f7, RA e1. Here, white is allowing black to exchange his strong knight on e5, because the rook can take his place on e5, and again the e5 square is totally in white's control. Also, because of this backward e6 pawn, black's bishop is not doing much. Black's bishop is totally a bad bishop. If you compare both the bishop, then you will see that white's most of the pawn are on black square, so they are not blocking their own bishop. So here bishop is easily moved. Bishop can move easily among these dark square pawns, but this is not the case with dark square bishop. Both the center pawns are on white, so these two center pawns are blocking black's bishop. Bishop d7, h4. So now as the king is moved up, white is thinking about opening the h file, so he can even play something like rook h1, rf7, h5, rook b7, h into g6, h into g6 forced, rook g5. Now black has to defend this pawn also. So all the weaknesses present on in black's position are attacked by white. So for example, this pawn is under attack. This g6, the new weakness, the isolated pawn is also under attack. King f7, rook h1. So once the king is moved away, now this open and exposed h file is attacked by white's rook, r8 g8, giving extra protection for the g6 pawn. f3, king e7, rook h6, one more attack. So forced, black has to support the g6 pawn with bishop e8. Rook e5, attacking, again shifting his attack on that e6 pawn. Rook f8, rook h1. So here instead of rook h1, I guess even f4 was better. Maybe he could have played f4 over here, and then maybe he can think about playing rook h1 and then rook even. But okay, nonetheless he plays rook h1, king d6, rook h even, bishop d7, c4. Now as the king side is fixed, black's king side is fixed and cramped, all the pieces are totally cramped, they are inactive while defending the pawn. There is no one on the queen side who can defend the king. Also, as you can see, the king is alone, kind of alone on the queen side. So now white uh, shifts his focus on the queen side. So it is c6, rook h1, bishop e8, b4, rook g8, b5. So here again, white wants to remove these two pawns. So once these two pawns are removed, he can use this diagonal for his bishop, and maybe he can start pressurizing this e6 pawn from this diagonal. c5. So that is why black chooses to keep the position closed. So whenever you are defending, try to keep the position closed, and whenever you are attacking, try to open the position. Rook h1, bishop f7, d into c5, bishop b into c5. Now, initially the bishop was there on this diagonal, but once the bishop is moved on f7 to guard these two weaknesses, now there is absolutely no one on the queen side to guard the king. So that is why white simply exchanges the pawns and then moves queen a4. Now queen a4, he is going to play queen e6 check, and then after this queen is lost, the queen is hanging, so black is going to lose his queen in a skewer. So he plays bishop e6, but again rook into e6, queen into e6. There is even no need to capture the queen right now, because white is getting the queen for free by playing queen a6 check, and then he can simply capture on the e6. So that is why after queen a6, black resigns. The main thing we have to consider in this line is, we don't want to, or we don't have to play c4 in the Dutch defense. So after d4 and f5, we can directly start with knight c3, and then we have to remove that f6 knight, and we have to give e4 break. In Dutch defense, you have to keep looking for the Staunton gambit. If you are very adventurous, if you like attacking all the time, then you can go for the Staunton gambit. Even if you don't want to sacrifice pawn that early in the game, you can go for that g4 line which we discussed. G4 line is also very interesting, where white gets open g file, and then he can start his attack through g file. So I hope you remember you all the point. I hope you understood all the points. If you enjoyed this video, please like the video and don't forget to subscribe our channel. We'll be getting more such interesting videos to you very soon. So till then, have a nice day. See you soon.